my microphone. Yay, there I am. Hello, me. Alright, so we got that figured out. Everybody over on Spreaker's probably like, what the crack is going on? Let me look up the Facebook really quick before we carry on. Make sure everything's all good over there. If there's an echo, anything else? No comments? Okay. Alright. Weird. I'm seeing a 0. But anywho's. So how you been? How you been doing? There's crazy news out there. So, I just saw this thing earlier on YouTube about bionic reading. I don't know if you've heard about it, but bionic reading. Let me look at my sound thing again. Yep, all good, not muted. Here we go. So bionic reading is where they have the font going on and certain parts of the font are like bold cast, highlighted, however you want to call it. And if you read that, you can actually read 2 to 3 times faster. And I tried that earlier, and it was pretty awesome. It actually did work. It did. It was amazing. And then, you know, we have the atmospheric river going to California, and then we have crazy laws going on. You know, the abortion pill, people being all pee-pee heard about that. And I think it's everyone's choice. Everybody's got different things going on in their lives. We don't know what's going on in their lives, so it's their decision. Also, let me see if this is coming through. You know, the abortion. Yeah, sounds good on there. Looks all good. And then I believe it was West Virginia. There's a law that was not passed. They were trying to pass a law where they're getting rid of teenage marriage. And, you know, this goes kind of hand in hand with teachers or any other person grooming a kid and eventually marrying them. And they also abolished the marriage rape law. So if you're married to someone and they force themselves upon you, you cannot scream rape. This is just, to me, insane. And I'm from Arkansas, so that says a lot for me as far as this. Okay, back in our grandparents' day, so my grandparents were married in 1912. And, no, born in 1912, married shortly after. Like, one of my sets of grandparents, one was 12, the other one was 18. My other grandparents, they were much older, more mature when they got married, but both sets stayed together forever. But they're saying, well, in case the 16-year-old gets pregnant, they should have the option to get married. But guess what? It's not just 16-year-olds. If you go further into that, it's up to the judge. If you're 12, 14, or whatever age, if the judge says it's okay for you to get married, then it's all good. And you can marry your teacher or whoever your groomer is. And I don't know, if he forces himself upon you, you can't say, oh, he raped me or anything like that. And yeah, I don't know. It's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. Hello, Alice. Thanks for joining us. So I'm looking at where we are here in this book. So the book we're reading from this evening is Death, A History of Man's Obsessions and Fears by Robert Wilkins. Before we go there, too, also the war between Russia and Ukraine is really freaking me out. So we've been helping Ukraine out because Russia did go in. And I know everybody has different stances on this, but as far as I'm concerned, Russia went in and they're trying to take territory and basically killing their cousins. It's really sad. And just recently, their armament has gone up a few notches and they're shooting different missiles into Ukraine. And it's not cool. Not cool at all. Let me put this up here so I can see the Facebook comments too, because for some reason they don't come through on my feed here. Just want to say hello, Alice. But yeah, they've been really bombing them hardcore, but yeah, they're really, really standing their ground and fighting as hard as they can. And then Biden's asking for another $862 billion that we don't have for this war, which I get it. He wants to help them, and I wish I could too, but I'm no longer in the military, and that really isn't an option for me. But at the same time, as far as the president was saying in Ukraine, and a lot of Republicans and different people put it out of stasis as far as, oh, he said this. No, he said a lot of things before he said that, and you're just taking this one clip. But he was talking about if Russia goes into NATO territory and starts to attack them, then America is going to have to come in aid and go to war, just like the young people in that country. And they're going to be dying just like they were. So, pretty scary war is, and everyone says all is fair in love and war, but is it really? I don't know. I really hate Putin. And it takes me back to, hey, what happened to Spy Days? Like, Spy versus Spy or whatever. Where's 007 when you need him? Where he can go in there and get into whatever structure that Putin is staying in and abolish this motherfucker. Because, seriously, this guy is out of hand. And he needs to be stopped. He really does. But, going back to story time, here we are. Let's quit talking about the scary, hairy things of the world, and let's move right along. Here's the book. Death. I was going to do my nails today, but they got to a certain length where they're starting to break off. But a history of man's obsessions and fears. So we're on the chapter of death and resurrection. And this part of the chapter is supply, demand, and market forces. You ready for this? Here we go. In the late 18th century, a number of intelligent and gifted men were drawn to surgery, and as a result, the social status of surgeons slowly improved. Surgeons, jealous of their reputations and incomes, endeavored to restrict recruitment to like-minded students. Such practices engendered profound resentment in those candidates rejected for surgical training. As a consequence, the reigns of the first two Georges, 1714-60, saw the rapid growth of privately run medical schools set up to challenge the monopoly, nepotism, and corruption of the abolished body of surgeons, who had parted company with the barbers in 1745. Isn't that funny? Barbers would do different things like bloodletting, etc. Pretty different times back then. I'm pretty sure you can't go to your barber and be like, hey, can you let a little bit of blood out? Since these new schools had to offer human dissection in order to attract students, the numbers of corpses available for dissection, always paltry compared to the demand, soon become woeful and inadequate. Since the dead bodies needed by the private medical schools could be obtained only by illegal means, the stage was set for the flowering of private enterprise and men prepared to supply dissecting material for trance surgeons. The reigns of George III and George IV, 1760 to 1830, were to witness the rise of the universally loathed and rivaled resurrectionists. Although Sir Astley Cooper despised Ben Croce, the two men were business partners. Cooper was president of the Royal College of Surgeons and had gained his baronetcy, I believe that's the word, in 1829 for his courage in removing a sebaceous cyst from George IV's scalp. Astley Cooper was also the hapless Bransby Cooper's uncle. Crouch was a drunken grave robber. Each depended on the other for his livelihood, for without Crouch, Cooper would be starved of the dissecting material he needed to keep his medical students from decamping to a rival anatomy school. And without Cooper, Crouch would have to ply an honest trade for a lot less remuneration. Cooper was the most famous surgeon of his day. Crouch was the leader of the infamous Barreau gang. Oh, I know that word. Two clues to the business that brought together such social opposites are provided by the following macabre accounts, which received nationwide publicity at the time. On a wild February day in 1809, the naked body of an old woman was washed ashore at the Bay of Nig, near Aberdeen. The badly decomposed corpse was identified as Mrs. Janet Spark, a 90-year-old widow who might well have been regarded as the unfortunate victim of a shipwreck, were it nor for the fact that this same lady had been buried in a graveyard of St. Fichtick's Church 3 days before Christmas. In October 1826, 3 large casks sat on the quay at St. George's Dock Passage, Liverpool, waiting to be loaded on the Latona for delivery to Edinburgh. The casks, labeled bitter salts, were addressed to Mr. G.H. Ironson. The crew complained about the noxious smell, until finally the captain pulled out a clump of hay, which had been plugged in a hole in the side of one of the casks immediately. Hello, Samantha. The stench became almost unbearable. Undeterred, the captain put his hand through the hole, and to his horror and surprise, it sank deep, gross, into a putrefying, oh my goodness, human flesh. Could you imagine? That's pretty grotesque. Ew. Alrighty then. When the police opened the casks, they found the bodies of 4 men and 7 women carefully packed in salt. The police traced the origin of the cargo to a cellar beneath a school, where they discovered further 9 men, 5 women, 5 boys, and 3 girls. The school children had recently complained of the smell coming from the cellar, but the Rev. James McGowan, headmaster and innocent dupe, had merely opened the windows and remarked that it was occasioned by the closeness. This next part of the chapter is The Diary of a Resurrectionist. Pretty intriguing. I'd like to hear more. Well, let's go. A diary which records the activities of a resurrectionist gang during a 12-month period spanning 1811 and 1812 is now the property of the Royal College of Surgeons in London. It is probably the work of Joshua Naples, a member of Crouch's gang, and has provided a unique and individual insight into the clandestine activities of the body snatchers. 5 months before Bellingham was hanged and dissected, an entry in the diary testified to the fact that London anatomists had sources of bodies other than those of convicted murderers. Sunday, 5th of January, 1812. At home all day, met at 5, whole gang went to Newen, which is Newington. Got 3 bodies. Jack and me took them to Wilson, James Wilson of the great Windmill Street Anatomy School. Came home, met at 12, got 5 adult bodies, and 2 small at Harp's, a.k.a. Harper's, probably the name of a keeper of a burial ground. Afterwards went to Big Gates, probably the entrance to another London burial ground, got 3 adults, left Dan at home, took the whole to Bartham, which is St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Dirty, dirty works, I tell you what. This abbreviated account of one day's work neatly encapsulates the lure of body snatching, money, and lots of it. The deadly haul that Sunday was 11 adult corpses and 2 children. Each adult corpse would be worth 4 guineas, provided they had not undergone post-mortem examination. Children's bodies were often sold by length, 6 shillings for the first foot and then 9 pence per inch. After expenses, a resurrectionist could expect to take home, or more likely, to spend on beer in excess of £10 per week. 20 times the average earnings of an unskilled worker. The easiest method of obtaining dead bodies was to bribe the people who were employed to safeguard them, which would be burial ground keepers. Dang. These low-paid officials could be persuaded to leave gates unlocked to facilitate entry for the resurrectionists. Bribery of a keeper probably accounts for the large number of corpses obtained by the gang in February. Thursday, 20th. Met and went to Pancras, a parish church between King's Cross and Kentish Town, got 15 large and 1 small, took them to Barthol, which is St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Failing such official connivance, the wives of resurrectionists would often pose as mourners, tag on to the end of a funeral party, and follow the bereaved to the graveyard. The women would then make careful mental note of the precautions that deceased relatives had made in their futile attempt to foil the grave robbers. The most common method was to place stones or shells on the earth covering the coffin. If any of these markers was subsequently moved, it would be evident that the resurrectionist had come visiting. This strategy had 2 serious flaws. Firstly, any disturbance of the markers would be noticed only after the body had been laid out on the anatomist's table. Secondly, after exhuming the body, the resurrectionist could easily replace the stones and shells in their original positions. There were many misconceptions about the methods used by resurrectionists for lifting a corpse. Thomas Wakely, founder of Lancet, gave in 1896 the following account of a modus operandi of the resurrectionists. So I have to say, I don't know if you watched Dr. Phil, but my uncle, daddy, I call him because he was my uncle, but he was also my dad. After my mom was killed by a drunk driver, and my dad went pretty downhill after there, and they came and got us, but he was killed in the hospital by fentanyl, and I found his record of what he wrote in his Book of Mormon, and I don't know, it was the day or the morning that we got the call that he had passed, and he was looking so good, except for that day when I looked in his eyes, I saw clouds, and that to me was very trippy. I was like, Uncle Bill, you have clouds in your eyes, and he's like, what? But as the night went on, he felt better, so we thought that that evening he would recuperate, but alas, he didn't, and I don't know if it was because of the ill will of his wife or not, but he wrote in his Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, Doctrine and Covenants, and Bible on one of the first pages, which I found because I was looking through his book. She's trying to kill me. I've told her if she gives me this, it's going to lower my oxygen intake. I have to let you know that my uncle was an ER nurse, and he knew about fentanyl, and he knew about all this stuff, and he knew how much he had been given already, and he knew this nurse was about to give him more. Unfortunately, this nurse was taking orders from 2 different doctors who weren't communicating. And why would somebody have 2 different doctors? But anywho's, he was murdered by fentanyl because both doctors prescribed that to him. Even his opposing it, like him opposing it, should have been enough, but it wasn't. But yeah, my sister went on to Dr. Phil, and she originally was my cousin, but now she's my sister because I was adopted. But went on to Dr. Phil and tried to talk about this, but Dr. Phil made it into something very, very dirty that it shouldn't have been. But yeah, he knew he was going to die, and he wasn't ready, and it's really sad that that happens. And I know it happens a lot to unfortunate, teenagers and other people that are addicted to opioids and different pills. Especially, what's coming from Mexico. There's a lot of stuff coming from Mexico as far as fentanyl and such, and don't do it. Like, it's even in methamphetamines, cocaine, like, whatever you like to partake of, that's not like mushrooms or something. They're smashing together so many things just to make a profit, and it's really scary. Just touching it, just breathing it in can be bad. But yeah, he died from that, and it's pretty scary. But let's continue on with the book. So, in the case of a new or not quite new grave, the ingenuity of the resurrectionist came into play. Several feet, 15 or 20, away from the head or foot of the grave, he would remove a square of turf, about 18 or 20 inches in diameter. Okay, now I remember where I was going with that. Let me put my finger here. So yeah, the lady that he was married to, except for they were separated, they didn't get divorced, but she was back with her ex-old man. The day that he had passed away, we went in there and, Amanda, we were all so upset. Amanda, Aunt Sandy, everybody. And we noticed different things around his room were missing. And me, being, investigator, I started digging through the trash, and I found so many things that he would have never thrown away, and anybody that loved him would have held on to. And then I noticed that his bag with his scriptures and other things were missing, and I told my mom, we have to go now. They're at Uncle Bill's house right now. And she's like, no, she's at work. And I'm like, call her right now and see. And she called, and of course she didn't answer because they were busy at my uncle's house taking his shit. But I was like, we need to go now. Like, they're robbing his house. I just knew it. And she's like, oh no, she's at work. Oh no, blah, blah, blah. I just wish people would listen to me. But, yeah, that's what happened, and we showed up, and her ex-husband were there. They were stealing my uncle's shit. Not only was my mom physically assaulted by Brenda's husband, but the whole scene was frantic and crazy and beyond anything that should happen on a day of somebody's death. But luckily, they were distracted by my sister and my mom. And I'm sorry my mom got assaulted, but I was able to get my Uncle Daddy's stuff back. So I found his case. I knew what it looked like. I saw it in her car. Luckily, the door opened. I tried a couple doors, but one of them opened, and I was able to get it back. Oh my gosh, she was so infuriated. But that's where I found his note about what happened to him that night. And I was able to find some checks that she was trying to take in cash and different things like that. But yeah, a funny thing that happened that day. The police came. There was no charges pressed against anyone, but nobody was allowed to go in there. Not even us, which is okay. We're okay with that. But Amanda, of course, was just fucking obliterated because her dad had just died. And Aunt Sandy had just been physically altercated or abused by this man that Brenda was married to before she married my uncle. But she had always been with him. She was a very shady individual. But they're like, you can take the car. Because Uncle Bill, and there was a statement there that Amanda had, she was to be given the car. And so I drove the car, and it was insane. Like, at first everything was okay, but then all of a sudden the horn started honking. Beep 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 beep, etc. You get the picture. And I was like, what the hell? So we pulled into AutoZone, and I turn off the car. I go in. I'm like, do you have one of those, electrical reader meter thingies that we can plug into the car and see why the hell this car is doing this? Because we don't think that there's a security system, but there might be. And it comes back and says, everything's all good. And I'm just checking the sound really quick because people keep coming in and out and I don't get it. But anywho's, everything was all good. And then after a while, it didn't do it anymore. But to me, it was kind of like Uncle Bill's like last stand. And he was such a fun guy. And he was young at heart, just like Dennis Dyke and other people that we know. And yeah, he's like beep, 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 beep. Like kind of like a parade for him, but through the center of Phoenix. So that was insane. But yeah, I just had to continue that before I continue on this book. So this he would carefully put by and then commence to mine. Most pauper graves were the same depth, and if the sepulchre was that of a person of importance, the depth of the grave could be pretty well estimated by the nature of the soil thrown up. Taking a 5-foot grave, the coffin lid would be about 4 feet from the surface. A rough slanting tunnel, some 5 yards long, would therefore have to be constructed, so as to impinge exactly on the coffin head, this being at least surface, or preferably the end of the coffin was wrenched off with hooks while still in the shelter of the tunnel, and the scalp or feet of the corpse secured through the open end, and the body pulled out, leaving the coffin almost intact and unmoved. The body once obtained, the narrow shaft was easily filled up, and the sod of turf accurately replaced. The friends of the deceased, seeing that the earth over this grave was not disturbed, would falter themselves that the body had escaped the resurrectionist, but they seldom noticed the neatly placed square of turf some feet away. Perhaps the reason that the square of turf was seldom noticed was because it was very seldom there. A little thought would soon show that anyone trying to rob a grave by this method would probably be buried alive in a collapsing tunnel. To imagine that such a tunnel, 18 inches in diameter and 15 feet long, could accommodate a grown man, complete with grappling tackle, and then allow him room to maneuver enough to prise off the end of the coffin and haul out the body. It does not take into account obstacles such as intervening boulders, gravestones, or graves, nor does it explain how to replace 25 cubic feet of earth in a manner that would not arouse suspicion. Okay, so these are the pages of a diary of a resurrectionist, 1811 to 12, usually ascribed to Joseph Naples, and detailing his activities as a grave robber. When the Anatomy Act was passed in 1832, Naples went legitimate and joined the staff of dissecting room of St. Thomas Hospital. But it's funny to me that this guy would keep a journal. So here's a picture of that. Why would he keep a journal of his foul activities? I do not know. The real methods used in lifting bodies were much less intricate and a lot quicker. Simplest of all was when the resurrectionist doubled as the gravedigger, or more accurately, grave filler, which was often case, working hidden from view at the bottom of the grave. He would open the coffin and bundle the body into a sack. Each time earth was thrown would be buried 6 feet down, but the sack would be left just below the surface, where it could easily be retrieved under cover of darkness. More commonly, a resurrectionist gang, using wooden shovels to minimize noise, would dig vertically down to the head end of the coffin. They would then cover the part of the coffin with canvas sacking, again to reduce noise, and proceed to prise off enough of the coffin lid to expose only the head of the corpse. Deftly, they would slip a rope noose over the head and draw the body out of the coffin and up to the surface. Francis Clarihew was a law student who would sometimes join his medical student friends to help them lift a corpse. He wrote an account of these nocturnal raids called My First Resurrection. As the body was being hauled to the surface, out flashed the moon, full on his wan, discolored face. His dull glassy eyes were wide open, and, as I thought, leered knowingly on me. His blue lurid lips were drawn back, and showed his white teeth. His arms hung dangling to the ground, and his head rolled about on its shoulders. An account of what it was like to be on the receiving end was provided by John McIntyre, buried alive in a state of trance in 1824. All was silent. I heard a low sound in the earth and fancied that the worms and reptiles were coming. The sound continued to grow louder and nearer. Can it be possible, thought I, that my friends suspect they have buried me too soon? They dragged me out of the coffin by the head. I was thrown down like a clod. Being rudely stripped of my shroud, I was placed naked on a table. The demonstrator took his knife and pierced my bosom. A convulsion shudder instantly followed. My trance was at an end. Ironically, it was not a crime to steal a dead body, since in law a corpse did not constitute property. The only items deemed property were the coffin itself and the shroud. Well aware of this legal distinction, the robbers would invariably strip the corpse and carefully place the shroud back in the coffin. The bodies, or things as they were referred to in the diary, would then be transported, usually by cart, to a safe house, where they could be sorted according to age, freshness, and destination. To reduce suspicion and the risk of being attacked by members of the public, the bodies were usually delivered in daylight, always assuming the robbers were not incapably drunk by dawn. Hello, Mackenzie. My beautiful daughter. So this one in the chapter is called Relationships with an Anatomist. Although there was interdependence between resurrectionists and anatomists, it was usually the resurrectionists who had the whip hand. The anatomists were only too well aware that without an adequate supply of dissecting material, their students would go elsewhere. Consequently, besides payment for an actual body, the resurrectionists would demand a décour at the beginning of the autumn anatomy season as evidence of the anatomist's goodwill, and finishing money at the end of the season. The anatomists were also expected to finance the resurrectionist family if he were imprisoned, and to welcome him back with a solatium financial compensation upon his release for gaol. These anatomists, foolish enough to argue with such overt blackmail, risked the full vengeance of the resurrectionists. Joshua Brooks, described by one of his colleagues as, without exception, the dirtiest professional I had ever met with, his filthy hands begrimed his nose with continual snuff. One of the finest anatomists of his day once refused to pay a douceur. One night the resurrectionist paid him a visit. At each end of the street in which his anatomy school was located, they placed a badly decomposed body. Two young ladies, out for a stroll, stumbled over the corpses, and such was the public outcry that the police had to be called to save Brooks from the fury of the mob. More gruesome still was the revenge of Old Cunny, an Irishman who used to supply bodies to the Ohio Medical College in Cincinnati. To pay back the students who had played a trick on him, he dug up the body of someone who had died of smallpox and succeeded in infecting many of the students with his fatal disease. Ew-wee. This next chapter is The Wiles of the Resurrectionists. Competition was also fierce among the resurrectionists themselves. Alliances and rivalries would frequently change. It was not unknown for one gang to break into an anatomy school and mutilate any corpses delivered by their rivals. It was not unusual for hospitals knowingly to buy back the bodies of patients who had died on the wards and who had been buried in the hospital graveyard. By this means, hospitals were able to preserve the fiction that paupers would receive a decent burial and not be subjected to the anatomists if they were to die. On New Year's Day, 1812, Joshua Naples and his Confederates dug up 3 adults, 2 in Guy's Hospital Cemetery and 1 in St. Thomas's, and then sold them back to precisely the same hospitals that had buried them. Occasionally, they would steal back bodies they themselves had delivered and proceed to resell them elsewhere. Sometimes wives of resurrectionists would call at a surgeon's premises and demand the body of their relative. The received corpse would then be quickly sold a second, even third time. Another useful role for wives was to visit local workhouses after the death of an inmate and pose as a long-lost relative. It is difficult to believe that the authorities were duped by this sham, but since it saved them the expense of a funeral, few questions were asked. Many of the vicissitudes of plying his necessary trade are alluded to by Naples in his diary. Cart broke down, met the patrols, moon at full could not go. Bill Harnett got arrested. The dogs flew at us, cut off extremities. Usually, when a corpse had been subjected to a post-mortem and only the arms and legs were intact, and found a watch planted, someone guarded the grave, usually a relative who could not be brighted. Bad nights were those when they returned empty-handed. On occasions, the gang exhumed a corpse only to find it bad, but even then all was not lost. Worked 2 holes, 1 bad, drew the canines. Anatomists were not the only professional clients of the Sack-em-up men. They also had very lucrative business dealings with dentists, who would be eager customers for purchasing front teeth to make dentures for the wealthy. Ew, that's so gross. Ew. What the heck? It is said that one resurrectionist gained entry into the family vault and managed to make off with 60 pounds worth of teeth. That's payment, not actual pounds. At the time of Peninsular War, Ben Crouch and Jack Harnett, Bill Harnett's brother, went on a business trip to Spain. Well, I thought I was at a good stopping point, but here we go. There they used to hover like vultures, pulling the teeth from dead and moribund alike. Hubert Cold, in Things for the Surgeon, describes their activities. The battlefield, quite in the half-light, the deadly perfume of blood and gunpowder hanging over the broken remains of men and horses, and the jackal figure moving stealthily from one body to the next, pincers in hand, open haversack at his side, wrenching and twisting, then passing on, leaving each tortured face with a wider, bloodier grin than before. Bodies were also taken for other, still more macabre uses. In an article printed in 1732, reference is made to one John Loftus, who confessed to the plunder of more than 50 bodies, not only for their coffins and burial clothes, but for their fat, where the bodies afforded any, which he retailed at a high price. Eewee. Burke and Hare. Edinburgh and Athens of the north had a second less flattering Sabrique resurrectionist capital of the world, which was the demand of corpses by the city's medical students, and cadavers commanded high prices, and supplies were regularly transported from London and shipped from Dublin. Orthodoxy in resurrectionism was represented by those who actually waited for the natural death of their quarry. It was inevitable that sooner or later someone would realize the accelerating death was much more cost-effective than waiting around for death to occur naturally. Oft it is wondered why, on Irish ground, no poisonous reptile ever could be found. Revelled the secret stands of nature's work, she saved her venom to create a Burke. By a medical officer in the Royal Navy, 1829. What a lovely poem, don't you think? William Burke and William Hare, two Irish expatriates living in Edinburgh in 1820s, never sullied themselves by robbing a grave. Instead, abetted by their womenfolk, they eased 15 people, mainly prostitutes, in the world beyond, via the anatomist's table, by suffocation, or burking as it came to be known. Oh my goodness. The idea first occurred to Hare in 1827, when one of his lodgers died owing him £4. Bemoaning his ill fortune, he discussed the debt with Burke. Between them they hatched a plan to remove a man from his coffin and sell the corpse for dissection to Professor Monro. Having bundled the body into a sack, the two men asked the way to Monro's bundled body and residence. The medical student directed them instead to Surgeon Square and the house of Dr. Robert Knox, who bought the corpse for £7 and 10 sesquins, more than either of them could legally earn in a month. Henceforth, anyone who could be inveigled back to Hare's boarding house was rendered incapably drunk and promptly suffocated with a pillow. Knox unquestionably bought all the bodies that Burke and Hare had supplied, and being especially based with the freshness of their material compared to the rotting flesh shipped to him from Ireland. Inevitably, a number of the victims were recognized by the doctors and medical students as Mary Patterson, a well-known prostitute, lay naked on the slab. The beauty of her body was much admired by some of her former clients. It is thought by some that Knox's assistant, William Fergusson, later president of the Royal College of Surgeons and surgeon to Queen Victoria, suggested to Burke that he cut off the woman's long golden hair in order to prevent positive identification should anyone come snooping. So proud was Knox that he postponed dissection of Patterson and had her placed in a barrel of whiskey for 3 months. James Wilson, an 18-year-old known throughout the city as Daft Jamie, was instantly recognizable, both facially and by his deformed and calloused feet. Ferguson promptly cut off the head and feet and quickly began the dissection. I just have to look at the sound again because I'm wondering, where is everybody? I don't see an echo. If anybody's out there, please let me know. How is this sounding? What the crack is going on? Where is everybody? With such medical collusion, Burke and Hare had every reason to feel that their source of easy money need never be discovered. But with continued success and excess alcohol came fatal carelessness. 2 of the Hares' lodgers found the naked body of Maggie Doctree stuffed under a bed awaiting transportation to Knox's premises. The police were informed, and the corpse was later found in the doctor's cellar. Hare obtained immunity from prosecution by turning King's evidence on Christmas Day, 1828, and jury found Burke guilty on 28 January, 1829, before a delighted crowd estimated to be between 20,000 and 30,000. Oh, thank you, William. Thank you so much for letting me know, because I'm like, why is everybody popping in and out? I don't get it. But maybe death, it is hard to deal with, but it's pretty intriguing. He was hanged and his body hanged to the College of Surgeons to be publicly dissected by Professor Monroe. His skeleton still hangs in the Anatomy Museum of Edinburgh University. Pieces of Burke's skin were tanned and sold at high prices. Charles Dickens is said to have used one as a bookmark. Seriously? Ew. The Burke and Hare murders did much to focus attention on the inadequate legal provision of bodies for dissection. Mob fury helped concentrate the minds of the members of the Parliamentary Select Committee set up to investigate matters in 1828. So here's a picture that is drawn. I hope it's not of a dead person, but if it is, it's quite beautiful. So Mary Patterson, an Edinburgh prostitute and victim of Burke and Hare, whose body was sold to Dr. Robert Knox, the anatomist. He so admired her beauty that he preserved the corpse in whiskey and postponed the dissection for 3 months. Redrawn by Robin Boutell from a contemporary sketch. Look, it's quite a beautiful sketch, really. If she's dead, she really doesn't look dead. She looks very nice. I must say she has a nicer ass than I. But if she's dead in that picture, that's pretty intriguing. So another sect in this we'll get to next hour. But unfortunately, we do have to go to our first music break. So on this break, we have Miss Mia Savage from Antidote with Savages. Don't worry, I won't be playing it through the microphone, as I did fix the thing. I did realize that I have not been playing my storytime music, so that could be one part of what's going on. But we have Miss Mia Savage with Antidote for Savages with Lumerian Crypto. It's a very good one. Your Skeleton, Let Me Be Your Home in Our New Reality. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
read my crypto. Take me to your leader or leave me alone. Somebody please take me out. Rest of time. Rest of time. Here. You're mine tonight. You're mine. You're mine. You're mine.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. So I don't know, still working on the sound issue. It was all jacked up for a minute, got it fixed, and here we are again at ground zero. Had to put on my epic headphones so I can hear the background music, but yes, we're going to continue on with the book Death, A History of a Man's Obsessions and Fears by Mr. Robert Wilkins. So let me know in the chat how it's sounding, because holy shnikes, this is insane. I thought the music was sounding good, and then I listened to it while on break, and I'm like, holy crap, this is all jacked up. Going fast, going slow, etc., etc. What the heck is really going on here? And then, is it buffering? I don't know. But I did think that I fixed it. Let me know, whoever's watching right now, in the chat, if it is still sounding okay. But we are to continue on. Birkin comes to London. Although grave robbing continued after Burke's execution, the public furor abated in the Anatomy Act of 1829, intended to provide alternative sources of bodies for dissection, was passed in the House of Commons but defeated in the House of Lords. Then, in 1831, public indignation was again aroused to fury by the activities of two London burkers, Thomas Williams and his brother-in-law John Bishop. These men enticed a 14-year-old boy into their house in Nova Scotia Gardens. His name was Carlos Ferrari, and he made a meager living by exhibiting caged white mice in the London streets. Okay, I think my roommate Davy Joe. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, right now the internet is sucking. Sorry guys. But let's continue, shall we? Jeez, oh Pete. When I say Wi-Fi off, that means Wi-Fi off. Oh man. Williams and Bishops plied the youth with rum and laudanum, and then rendered him unconscious with a blow to the neck. Finally, they lowered him head-first into a well. Disposing of Ferrari's body proved difficult. The men tried the private anatomy schools and Guy's Hospital before arriving at King's College Hospital. The staff at King's were suspicious about the way the boy had met his death. Mr. Partridge, the demonstrator of anatomy, kept the murders awaiting while he professed to get charge of a £50 note. In fact, Partridge's colleagues were contacting the police. Subsequently, an empty mouse cage was found back at the men's house, and at Mr. Partridge's suggestion, cheese was put down to tempt the incriminating white mice out from under the floorboards. A post-mortem examination showed that the boy's teeth had been removed and sold to a dentist. Both men were hanged and dissected. Williams was sent off to St. Bartholomew's, and Bishop met up for a final appointment with Mr. Partridge at King's. The death of Carlo Ferrari had an immense impact on accelerating the passage of Warburton's Anatomy Act of 1832. Upper-class resurrectionists. In the 17th century, here, let me check my sound really quick. Looks good. Over here looks good. Yes, we're all good. Yay. So in the 17th century, medical students were expected to provide their own cadavers for dissection. Like, how do you get your own body for school? It's hard enough to get art supplies these days. That's crazy. In latter decades, when the dangers of getting caught necessitated that such work be relegated to what Astley Cooper called the dregs of humanity, there were still a few surgeons who relished the challenge of procuring their own corpses. One such was in Edinburgh anatomist and surgeon Robert Liston, 1794 to 1847, who formed an unlikely alliance with Ben Crouch, the Corpse King, on an enforced holiday from London, to lift the body of a boy who had died with hydrocephalus, water on the brain. The boy's relatives, well aware of the worth of the body, to an anatomist, mounted a dusk-till-dawn vigil in the cemetery on the shores of the Forth. Many weeks after the burial, two well-dressed gentlemen parked their dog-cart at the local pub, telling the landlord that they were expecting delivery of a parcel. In a little while, the man dressed in a scarlet livery deposited a parcel under the seat of the cart and walked away. Presently, the two men reappeared and trotted off at a brisk pace. The stable boy commented that the liverman bore a remarkable resemblance to one of the owners of the cart. At about the same time, the night watch arrived at the cemetery, only to find the grave disturbed and the boy's body decapitated. Liston and Crouch had lifted the corpse in less than 30 minutes. To redress Liston's reputation, it must be recorded that he was one of the most skilled of surgeons in those grisly pre-anesthetic days. He once took a mere 33 seconds to amputate a patient's leg at the thigh. Unfortunately, in so doing, he also amputated 3 of his assistant's fingers. Ew. Although the majority of the bodies dug up by the London resurrectionists were delivered to the city's anatomists, there was a limited export market. Naples occasionally packed up corpses for delivery north, especially to Edinburgh. When Lawrence Sterne, author of Tristram Shandy, died penniless in 1768, his body was exhumed from the burial ground of St. George's, Hanover Square, and turned up on an anatomist's table in Cambridge 2 days later. Although dying a pauper made Sterne vulnerable to falling prey to the resurrectionists, since the poor were invariably buried in shallower graves and required a lot less effort to lift, Sir Astley Cooper, in his evidence to select committee, boasted that there is no person, let his situation in life be what it may, whom, if I were disposed to dissect, I could not obtain. Such arrogant self-confidence makes improbable that Cooper was the surgeon Robert Southey had in mind in his poem, The Surgeon's Warning. I have made candles of dead man's fat, the sextons have been my slaves. I have bottled babes unborn and dried, hearts enlivered, rifled graves. And my pretenses now will surely come, and carve me bone from bone. And I who have rifled the dead man's grave shall never have rest in my own. Well, you just wait, mister. You're going to have your turn, which you have already. So the next part of this chapter is called Methods of foiling the resurrectionists. So we're trying to go get tricky. The surest way to lay undisturbed in the grave was to have a large extended family who thought enough of you to mount a graveside vigil for 3 or 4 weeks after your funeral, by which time putrefaction would have seriously dented the enthusiasm of resurrectionists and anatomists alike. In some burial grounds, brick buildings were erected to keep the bodies under lock and key until they putrefied. Such a building can still be seen in the burial ground at Crail. The putrefaction principle also lay behind the resurrectionists of the turntable storage house of Udny, just north of Aberdeen. Corpses in their coffins were loaded onto the turntable through a hole in the perimeter wall. The rotation of the table was so slow that one revolution of the carousel took 2 to 3 weeks. Consequently, by the time the body reappeared at the aperture, it was in a state of advanced decomposition and of no interest to the anatomists. Infamy could greatly enhance the desire of surgeons to lift the dissect. Dick Turnip, the notorious highwayman, always feared ended up on an anatomist's slab. Oh, see, that's what I'm saying. He's gonna get his just. When he was hanged at York in 1739, his friends and admirers buried him deep in an unmarked grave. Despite these precautions, the resurrectionists located the skull and the body. An extensive search was made, and Turpin's corpse was found in the garden of a local surgeon. This time nothing was left to chance. They packed the coffin with quicklime, a caustic substance which would rapidly dissolve flesh and mutilate the bones. Being the relative of a surgeon or a medical student could save you from dissection. The body of a child brought to Hollis, a well-known resurrectionist at St. Thomas's Hospital, was recognized by a medical student as his piece, whereupon the girl was promptly returned to her grave. But being a relative of a resurrectionist conferred no such immunity. A Gaelic trio of Sackamuck men operated at Edinburgh. Mary Andrew, 19th century getaway driver and in charge of the cart. The Spoon, so called because of the skill with which he scooped the dead from their coffins, and the Mole, who did the digging. Spoon and Mole spell out with Mary Andrew over money, and when Mary Andrew's sister died, they decided to take their revenge by exhuming her and selling her corpse for dissection. Just as they were hoisted the body to the surface, they were terrified by the white shrouded figure, which jumped out from behind a tombstone. As Spoon and Mole fled, Mary Andrew discarded his sheet and crossed to his sister's grave, rather than turn down the prospect of easy money, especially as a result of the endeavor of others. Mary Andrew bundled her sister into a sack and made off for the Surgeon Square. So this is the death mask of William Burke, sentenced to hang on 28 January 1829. His body was handed over to Edinburgh University dissecting. I'm wondering still how this is sounding. Let me see. Sounds good to me. Don't know why you guys keep scurrying off, but let's continue. Other simple though costly expedients resorted to in order to foil the resurrectionists included deeper burial, burial in a secure vault, hire of a massive stone slab to be laid over the coffin until putrefaction set in, or the construction of an iron grill, known as a mort safe, to be placed over the grave and set in cement. Examples of mort safes can still be seen at Greyfriars Churchyard in Edinburgh. Sometimes bereaved relatives and friends would seek the deter resurrectionists by laying strip wires which would fire rounds from a spring gun. Well, that's pretty interesting. Creative. I'll give you an A+ for that. Wow. Wow, I must say, wow. Such stratagems were usually easy to detect, and the reconnoitering wife of a resurrectionist would simply fall to the ground, weeping and wailing, and make the contraption safe by deftly cutting this wire. Occasionally things went fatally awry. When 3 medical students went foraging for bodies in Blackfriars churchyard, one of them was killed when he stumbled over a tripwire. His companions decided that they could not leave him there, so they propped him upright, tied his left ankle to one of them and his right ankle to the other. Slinging a dead arm around each neck, they staggered, as if drunk, back to their lodgings. Bridgman's patented coffin. It would seem an obvious way of foiling the resurrectionists to be buried in an unopened coffin. In 1818, Edward Lilly Bridgman invented such a coffin that boasted no screws, hinges, or movable parts, was made of wrought iron, and was virtually unbreakable and impregnable. Capriciously, this boon to humanity was not welcomed, especially by the clergy, who depended upon the natural rotting of corpse and coffin to enable further burials to be made in the same place at a later date. A graveyard full of imperishable coffins would quickly become full of capacity and full for eternity. Revenue would cease and owners of burial grounds would be put out of business. Mrs. Gilbert of Holborn became a posthumous test case when the rector of St. Andrew's Church refused to accept her in a Bridgman coffin. Bridgman appealed to the Bishop of London, who suggested that the deceased be transferred to a more conventional coffin, a naive suggestion since the coffin she was already in could not be opened. In June 1819, 3 months after her death, Mrs. Gilbert's cortege arrived at the cemetery gates, which were immediately slammed shut by the sexton. In the interim, the coffin was laid on top of one of the tombstones, and the undertaker told the people that the only reason be deprived of bribes from resurrectionists. Okay, so the only reason the sexton was refusing permission for burial was because he feared he would be deprived of bribes from the resurrectionists. Night fell, a fight ensued, and Bridgman was thrown into gaol. The long-dead Mrs. Gilbert spent the night perched precariously on the tombstone. In September, Bridgman finally won his fight, and Mrs. Gilbert went beneath the ground despite his victory. Bridgman's coffin never really became popular, due largely to its high costs. Miscellaneous deterrents. The ultimate deterrent was dreamt up by a father of a child buried in Dundee. To ward off resurrectionists, a small box packed with gunpowder was connected to the 4 corners of the coffin. The sexton, justifiably nervous, jumped back in great alarm after throwing in the first shovelful of earth. The ancient Egyptians had recourse to curses as a deterrent. Threats were carved on the walls of tombs described the consequences of any violation. The most famous of curses was Tutankhamun's. It was almost the most indiscriminate. Lord Carnarvon, who financed the excavations, died in 1923, before he set eyes on the young pharaoh, while Howard Carter, the archaeologist who broke through into the funerary chamber. Carter lived on for another 60 years, dying in 1939 at the age of 65. One particular vengeful mummy is thought by some to have caused the deaths of 4,190 people. It was shipped to America in 1912 in the hold of the Titanic. A Tale of Two Giants. Once upon a time, in the late 1780s to the early 1800s, there were in England two Irish giants, Charles O'Brien. I might be related to that guy. I'm an O'Brien. And Patrick Cotter, also known confusingly as Patrick O'Brien, both of whom claim descent from Brian Boru. So did my father, Brian Boru, king of the Irish in the 10th century. In those days, freaks of all types could make a reasonable income by exhibiting themselves at fairs and festivals. There was, however, one great drawback. Such publicity inevitably brought one to the notice of antagonists, eager to probe and poke into the dark recesses of one's dead body. Charles O'Brien was the shorter of the two men, a mere 7 feet 6 inches. That's about how tall my dad was. Wasn't short. I'm 5'4", so I'm short. He died of alcohol-induced illness while still in his early 20s in 1783. John Hunter, arguably the most famous of all the antagonists, had been patiently biding his time. When the news broke of O'Brien's final illness, Hunter immediately sent his man, Howison, to reconnoiter. O'Brien got to hear of this, and the anxiety engendered, no doubt, hastened his demise. Before his death, the Irishman left strict instructions that his body was to be watched day and night, that he was to be sealed in a coffin of lead and then sunk far out to sea. Poor simple O'Brien was never a match for Hunter, who had waited so long to capture this famous specimen. Hunter may have been an exceptional anatomist and surgeon, but he was a lousy businessman. Howison took him to the public house in which a number of O'Brien's so-called miners were drowned their sorrows. Hunter offered £50, an enormous sum of money, if they would give over the corpse for dissection. He would have done better to conceal his obvious excitement. The men initially agreed, but then demanded more money, then more, and yet more. In the end, Hunter had to pay £500. Some say $700 for O'Brien. Under cover of darkness, the body was transferred from a hackney coach to Hunter's carriage and taken straight away to the surgeon's house in Earl's Court. Fearing treachery, Hunter lost no time in disposing of the giant's carcass. It was cut into manageable pieces and the flesh boiled from the bone in a huge vat in the basement. As mute testimony to the obsession of a collector and the untrustworthiness of friends, Charles O'Brien stands to this day on permanent display in Hunter's museum. I wonder if he's my relative. I am a O'Brien, after all. This is insane. Now part of the Royal College of Surgeons in London, his massive frame is in a comical contrast to the minute skeleton of Miss Caroline Crackamie, the 22-inch dwarf who shares his glass cage. Aww, that's sad. I don't know why they do that, but I don't know. I guess it is science. Cotter died in Bristol in 1806. He was taller than O'Brien and shared with his famous predecessor the dread of dissection. Hunter died in 1793, but his place had been taken by another anatomist, equally fanatical. Cotter died a richer man than O'Brien, in the bosom of friends he could trust. He left minute instructions for the disposal of his body. His corpse was to be enclosed in 3 coffins. Oh my God. An inner one of wood, an intermediate one made of lead, the whole enclosed in one of Mr. Panting's stupendous coffins. The outer coffin, measuring 9 feet 6 inches long, and 3 feet across for the shoulders, was borne to the grave, carried by 14 men and lowered by pulleys into a shaft 12 feet deep, dug into the solid rock beneath the Roman Catholic chapel in Trenchard Street, Bristol. As added insurance against the resurrectionists, iron bars were embedded in the concrete above the grave. So, I have to show you guys these pictures because they're pretty intriguing. John Hunter's copper in the basement of his Earl's Court home, which he used to reduce the body of Charles O'Brien. So here's that picture. Oh, let me get it back. And then this one is Charles O'Brien, the Irish giant, 7 feet 8 inches, towers over Caroline Krakami, the Sicilian dwarf, a mere 20 inches high. Aww. That's creepy, yet cute. Oh my goodness. The local anatomist, Richard Smith, went to his own grave lamenting the loss of such a prized specimen. His deathbed irritation was recounted by his pupil, George Spykoff, in 1875. 35 years ago, I was pupil to Mr. Richard Smith, the senior surgeon of the Bristol Infirmary. Mr. Smith was at the time the oldest hospital surgeon in England, and had collected the finest provincial pathological museum in the country. Not long before he died, about the year 1843, he told me the following story. They tell you in London that they have got the skeleton of O'Brien in the College Museum, but they have not. They have got O'Byrne. Oh my gosh, my brother was telling me about this earlier. O'Byrne, a smaller man. Why, O'Brien was 8 feet 2 inches. If anybody could have got out of his body, it would have been myself. He was buried in the porch of the Roman Catholic Church in Trenchard Street. I was determined to have him, and took a house on the other side of the street, that we might dig a tunnel under the road and remove him quickly. But we found he was buried in a grave sunk deep in the red rock, and the stone over him secured by strong iron bars, so that we could not run a mine to him without blasting the gunpowder. So we gave the plan up. Cotter laid undisturbed for 100 years. In 1906, his skeleton was discovered when workmen were laying new drains. The interval between discovery and reinterment provided a golden opportunity for latter-day anatomists to examine the giant. Professor Fawcett painstakingly measured and photographed Cotter's remains. Would Cotter have minded? After what interval of time does it become acceptable to probe and poke and measure? Oh my goodness. Alternative supplies. Before we look to the provisions of the Anatomy Act, which set out to put an end to the activities of the resurrectionists, let us examine the alternative sources of supply of dead bodies for dissection prior to 1832. Besides the bodies provided by the resurrectionists, there were few other sources of supply. The newspapers of the day were never short of suggestions. Since prostitutes spent their lives corrupting mankind, it was only right and proper that they pay for their immortality or immorality by furthering medical knowledge. Yes, those dirty whores should pay. Whatever. Others suggested that people who committed suicide should be anatomized, and anyone who died as a result of dueling, fighting, or drinking. Mr. Dermot, proprietor of the Little Windmill School of Medicine, suggested that all doctors should donate their own bodies for dissection after death. Some people were willing to offer their bodies for dissection in return for a little bit on account, or other people's bodies, as the following letter to Sir Astley Cooper shows. So before we move on to this letter, let us look at some more pictures. Because, you guys more than likely read the articles instead of looking at the pictures. So we have Patrick Cotter's skeleton exhumed in 1906, 100 years after his death, lying at a depth of 10 feet below the Roman Catholic Chapel, Trenchyard Street, Bristol. The discovery was made during the laying of new drains. And then Patrick Cotter's femur compared to a skeleton which measures 5 feet 4 inches. Continue. Holy shnikes, that's huge. What the crack? Look at the size of that femur. Sir, I have been informed that you are in the habit of purchasing the bodies and allowing the person a sum weekly. Knowing a poor woman that is desirous of doing so, I have taken the liberty of calling to know the truth. I remain your humble servant. No doubt, suspecting a burker, the baronet replied, "The truth is that you deserve to be hanged for such an unfeeling offer. AC, that way Sir Astley might have got hold of a body free of charge." Bequests were rare, though not unknown. In 1828, a mass pledge of bodies was initiated by Professor Macartney of Dublin. By 1831, more than 400 people, many of whom were said to be doctors, had signed up to donate their corpses for dissection. There is little evidence that the exercise was taken seriously. Indeed, it was met with wry amusement in London medical circles. A contributor to The Lion in 1829 divulged details of his will in which he left instructions for his body to be anatomized, his skin to be tanned and used to cover an armchair, his bones given to a turner to be made into knife handles, pin cases and buttons, and his flesh to be mixed in a vase with quicklime, covered with earth and planted with a rose. Richard Carlyle, who published The Lion, pointed out that members of the royal family were frequently embalmed, and that this entailed some degree of dissection. He went on to suggest that the king might start a fashion by denoting his body to the surgeons. Henry Hunt, a member of Parliament, who objected to Henry Warbottom's ideas about the use of pauper corpses, was more direct. Talking about the rich paupers on the civil list, he advocated that the bodies of all our kings be dissected, instead of expending 700,000 or 800,000 pounds of public money for the interment. He went on to add to his list of involuntary donors hereditary legislators and priests and vicars who feed themselves and not their flocks. Colonel Sibthorpe advocated that all horse thieves should be hanged and dissected. Others were moved to donate their bodies without thought of monetary gain. Messenger Monsey, an eccentric physician at the Chelsea Hospital, was so anxious to be dissected that in 1787 he wrote to Mr. Cruikshank, an anatomist, Mr. Foster, a surgeon in Union Court, Broad Street, has been so good as to promise to open my carcass and see what is the matter with my heart, arteries, kidneys, and such. He has gone to Norwich and will not return before I am dead. Will you be so good as to let me send it to you? And Mr. Boyes, he died in 1835, wished to be made into essential salts for the use of his female friends. Gross. In a letter to Dr. Campbell, written 4 years before his death, he asks, "Are you now disposed, without Wilkin, to accomplish my wish, when my breath or spirit shall be ceased, to animate my carcass, to perform the operation of vitrifying my bones, and sublimating the rest, and that I may not be offended the delicate olfactory nerves by my female friends with a mass of putridity. If it be possible, let me rather fill a few bottles of essential salts therefrom and revive their drooping spirits." What a romantic guy. Jeremy Bentham and his auto icon. Like the O'Briens before him, Jeremy Bentham was a giant. So was my dad. He was so big. He was like basically 7 feet tall and 3 foot broad. He was a big guy. John O'Brien Thomas. Though of normal physical stature, this 18th century philosopher dwarfed his contemporaries in intellect and vision, and is best remembered for having formulated the principles of utilitarianism. Yes, that's it. The greatest good for the greatest number. To Bentham, there was no reason why utilitarian philanthropy should not extend beyond the grave, though, as we shall see, he himself had no intention of ever being buried beneath the sod. In 1824, Dr. Thomas Southwood Smith wrote an influential article in the Westminster Review entitled "Use of the Dead to the Living," in which he eloquently argued that the progress of surgery was being needlessly and dangerously impeded by the scarcity of legal sources of bodies for dissection. Smith asserted that ignorant physicians and surgeons were the deadly enemies of the community, and highlighted the illogicality of being able to understand the workings of the human body without inspecting the interior of this curious and complicated machine. Southwood Smith argued that ignorance of the course of major blood vessels had cost the life of Sir Philip Sidney, the light and glory of his age cut off in the bloom of manhood. This Elizabethan poet's inestimable life would have been saved if only the medical men had known the pressure point at which to stem the hemorrhage from the severed artery. Southwood Smith's solution in 1824 was for the bodies of paupers to be given up for dissection. By 1832, he had changed his mind and was advocating that people donate their bodies to the advancement of medicine. It was an idea that Jeremy Bentham embraced with enthusiasm. Long before, in 1769, Bentham had decided to bequeath his body for dissection, but when he read Smith's article, he was determined that this surgeon was the man to carry it out. When Bentham died in June 1832, invitations were distributed to a select number of followers and admirers. "Sir, it was the earnest desire of the late Jeremy Bentham that his body should be appropriated to an illustration of structure and functions of the human frame. In compliance with this wish, Mr. Southwood Smith will deliver a lecture over the body on the usefulness of knowledge of the kind to the community. The lecture will be delivered at the Webb Street School of Anatomy and Medicine, Webb Street, Borough, tomorrow at 3 o'clock, at which the honor of your presence and that of any 2 friends who may wish to accompany you is required. Friday, 8th June, 1832. So I'm looking at the time and I'm going to have to cut it off there. We'll continue tomorrow, but we do have to go to our second music break, if you will. Hopefully this one works out better, because last time was not that great. I'm gonna probably have to mess around with the sound a little bit more to get it worked out, but hello, beautiful sister Sandra. We have Miss Mia Savage with her band Antidote for Savages with Bury Me in Heaven, one of my favorite songs, Singing to Your Grave, The Bottom Line, and Not a Phase. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
right now between fear and love. Choice right now between fear and love.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. This evening we have covered Robert Wilkin's book, Death, and that is the history of man's obsessions and fears. So that's been a pretty intriguing book. I've really enjoyed it. But we are going to carry on in the third hour, and we shall be reading from Reddit Ghost Stories. If you guys are ready, we're about to get into it. If you're not ready, let me know. I will pause for the cause, but this first story is called Devil in the ICU. This is from u/competitive-ad-8646. And this is actually an experience. My mom used to work night shift at a hospital before she retired. Years ago, she had a terrifying experience that she recently told me about. During one of her shifts, she had an elderly patient that was in the ICU getting ready to pass. Oftentimes, my mom would sit and visit with her patients during their downtime. The woman was crying, so my mom held her hand and asked what was wrong. While still crying, the woman said that he was here for her. She said that he was evil when he was alive, and he's still just as evil now. Confused, my mom asked if the lady was talking about her husband. The woman told my mother that her dead husband made her life a living hell, and now, on her deathbed, had been in her room for days tormenting her. He told her he was here to take her. She said he had been standing in the corner of the room since she was admitted into ICU. My mother offered to pray with the woman, which she accepted. The woman eventually passed, but had told my mother before she went that she no longer saw her husband, and she was able to go in peace. It's kind of creepy, and that happens a lot with people when they're about to pass. Different people will come for them. So, I don't know, it's kind of a scary thing that happens to people. This one is called The Old Man at the Top of My Stairs. This one is by u/Damn You Fine. Damn you fine. Hi, I am an 18-year-old female. This happened a while ago, yet it still goes on. My parents bought my current house when I had just turned 1. From ages 3 to 5, my younger sister and I used to see a ghost at the top of the stairs of an old man who used to wave at us and was very gentle. We used to see him at our bedroom doors in the evenings as well. I don't recall this and thought my mom was just lying to my sister and I that there was a ghost in our house until I saw it myself. Our next door neighbors had brought their kids over so I can babysit them. I was about 12 at the time and they were ages 3 and 6. I walked into the kitchen to get them a snack, and when I walked back, they were saving and waving at something upstairs. I asked them, and they told me it was an old man. Both children told me that they could see him. I was terrified. I have come to realize that any child 3 to 6 can see him when they come over, but only once, so I'm not sure why my sister and I could see him multiple times. Either way, it's still scary as fuck. I don't know if you guys have had anything like that, but it is scary to see something in real life. This is another one by u/Damn You Fine. And yes, I must tell you, you guys are looking very good today. Keep it up, whatever you're doing, but thanks for hanging out. I saw my dead uncle, whom I never met. Hi everyone, I am now currently an 18-year-old female. These happened a while ago, and I'm finally ready to share because they still terrify me every now and then. First off, when I was about 7 or 6, my uncle had recently passed away. I had never met him because he lived so far away, but my parents decided to take a trip to visit his grave. My dad stayed in the car with myself and my younger sister, and only my mom got out. When we had arrived at the graveyard, it was midday. My sister and I saw a short old man wearing a top hat, a black jacket, and shorts. He was playing peekaboo with both of us, and we were laughing hysterically. My dad noticed and called my mom back to the car. When she got back, they both asked us who we were playing with. We responded, "That man over there." And both my parents turned to each other with horror faces. They asked us what he was wearing, and we explained to them. They were shocked, as that's what he was wearing when they buried him. Mind you, we never met him. This memory still scares me. This one is by you/Adrian Tyken True. I think there is a spirit in my house. I've recently gotten into learning about ghosts, and today I wanted to see if there are any dormant spirits in my house. My house doesn't have a lot of history to it, but one thing that happened was a house fire before I bought it. I'm not sure the full details or if anyone died, but I still keep in consideration and memory. So today, I try to see if there was any spirits in my house. I haven't experienced any paranormal activity in this house, but when I was younger, I did experience some activity in the form of nightmares. But since moving into this house, nothing happened, so I always thought that this house was perfectly fine. That was until today. Now, you can say whatever you want about a ghost tube, whether it's real or fake, but I used it because those are the only tools I can use except for a digital voice recorder I had lying around. I used the Spirit Box app, the SLS camera app, and the EMF and EVP app. The most I have gotten from those were EMF and EVP, or Original Ghost Tube. While the voice recorder hasn't revealed any results, but the results from the Spirit Box app and the OG Ghost Tube app possibly revealed that there are spirits in my house. Starting with the Spirit Box, I couldn't really make anything out except for the number 500. When I asked if there was any spirits in the house, other than that, I couldn't make out anything from it. But for the OG Ghost Tube, I got a lot more from it. Here are the words that were generated in order from the earliest to the latest. Not, mark, where am I? Farther, brother, hell, scream, haunted, Adam, okay, leave me alone. I stopped after it said, leave it alone. Out of respect for it, if there is a spirit in my house, like I said, you can believe whatever you want about GhostTube, but I now believe that there may be one or multiple spirits in my house. I'm going to work on getting real equipment to prove whether I have spirits or not in my house. I'll keep this sub posted. Until next time. This one is by you/Patient Disastrous 839. Turn this up just a little. I want to hear the background music. So in Ireland, you're never far from the sea. I'm very used to my proximity to the water in a way that I imagine many of you aren't due simply to geography. I was born on the north coast of Ireland, technically Northern Ireland, near Ballycastle, a small town up there. Like most coastal towns, our part of the world comes alive in the summer with people from all over, but in the winter it is quite barren and isolated. Unlike most people, it was that time of the year, beginning in late autumn and running through the middle of the spring, that I enjoy the sea most. There's something quite special about having access to sprawling beaches when most people don't bother to give them a chance. Even on dull days, the roar of the sea and all its expanse claims me, particularly at dawn and dusk, when the light of the sky makes the water glimmer with a mystery that I can't characterize. My story begins and ends with the sea. Before I really begin, I'd like to give you a brief rundown of Selkie or Silkie lore. Selkies are a type of being who, legend has it, inhabit the seas around the northern British Isles, although they can be traced as far as Iceland. The sea north of Ireland is inhabited by seals, and it isn't uncommon to see a colony of seals, or perhaps an individual, further out from the towns. I don't know if there exists an animal more charming than a seal, with its lively barks and its smiling face, so like that of a human. The Selkie takes the form of a seal, but is really a being with the ability to remove its coat and take on a human-like form. Traditionally, tales speak of Silkies appearing as beautiful women. But if you delve deep into folklore, Silkies or Selkies appear in all kinds of human forms. Legend has it that they appear in groups on moonlit beaches at certain times during the year, far from human eyes. Here, they will remove their silk coats and take their human bodies, dancing with jubilance to the music under the light of the moon, before eventually returning to the sea. It sounds like a very innocent myth, but there is a darker side to the Selkie. Ireland isn't a large country, and so relatively speaking, you can never be too far from humanity or civilization. If misfortune strikes and a human catches sight of a group of Selkies, they will dart to their coats and make their way back to the sea without hesitation. If, however, the human takes hold of one of the coats, their skin, then the Selkie is bound to him. The Selkie cannot return home without this. Consequently, stories tell of men taking Selkies as wives, keeping the seal skin hidden away. The Selkie will never stop longing for its home and family, but will be trapped in the home of the captor for the remainder of their lives unless they are able to recapture their lost coat. Most would never succeed in doing so. Like most myths, I would have always taken Selkies with a pinch of salt. That is, until I was 17, and I had my own experience that really is unexplainable unless we place some credence on Selkie lore. As I say, I was born by the coast, just outside of town. Teenage life can be challenging for anyone, but for me, this was amplified by being a queer person in a very small community. It wasn't easy, but I found some solace in nature, which, as I said, provided me with headspace at a time when I needed it more than anything. Ironically, the best tonic for my sense of isolation was isolation. A self-built isolation on those evenings when I could walk the 10 minutes to the beach and enjoy the setting sun, which made the water glisten with hope and that unexplainable sense of mystery. I spent hours down there, particularly on the cold days, when contact with other people would be minimal. Mostly, there wouldn't be much to say about these evenings. I would walk and walk and walk, and eventually begin to switch off. Not terribly exciting, but steady and constant. There was one evening, however, when my path took a different turn. There was a section of the beach that was somewhat shrouded by dunes and rocks. A quiet cove a few miles down from the side of the beach I started at. We were deep in spring at this point. I know this because I could never have made it this far along the sand in the winter months when daylight was minimal. I was trying to maximize my time here before the tourist season began and the area would begin to fill with people from all over. On the beach, ahoy, Jason, ahoy! I was stricken by sight of what looked like a young man. The light was beginning to dim, and the sea had a purpley hue. He was strewn out on the sand, his form slender and somehow gentle. It would have been somewhat unusual to see someone this far out along the beach at this time of year, but not altogether shocking. What was shocking was that he was entirely naked. With not a single item of clothing in sight either on his body or on the sand. I'll inform you now that although winter had ended, an Irish spring is hardly warm. It isn't rare for snow to fall as late as March and April, and the wind, particularly by the sea, is biting and at times relentless. You can understand my shock then upon seeing this naked figure on the beach that day. What made it more bewildering was that his body appeared to glimmer. It was as though he was formed from a matter related to the sea before us, which gleamed in much the same way. His pale skin imitated its hue, moving softly with the sun to create something that transfixed me. Ordinarily, I'd have been deeply embarrassed by anything related to nudity or sex. I was an awkward 17-year-old from rural Ireland, but this was different. In the same way that the sea at this time of day calmed me and soothed me, it was as though he had inspired the same effect, though somehow magnified. I lost track of time spent in that spot. I'm embarrassed to write now that I stood staring at what I thought was a naked man for any amount of time, but I can only be honest. And then it was over. He opened his eyes suddenly and appeared to become stiff in a way that contrasted with his until then relaxed form. I saw him turn his eyes to me, which widened in shock. These eyes, I remember, were striking even from a slight distance. They were gray, but startling so, almost sinking into the whiteness that surrounded them like watercolor and piercing despite the lack of hue. His entire form was one pale glistening shape that melded together and appeared translucent in the dimming light. He quickly and soundlessly rose to his feet and moved with a sharp fluidity to the rocks behind him, still frozen. I watched as he emerged from the rocks carrying what looked like a silvery piece of cloth, which matched his own body. I say cloth, but it did not move in the wind which was blowing in from the sea. It seemed solid and heavy, but he carried it effortlessly to the sea at a fast pace, his eyes staring intently at me the whole time. When he reached the sea, he stepped into the water with the coat and buried himself in the waves, and then he was gone. At this, I shook myself back to life and moved towards the shore myself. Much as I tried, I could not make out his form anywhere. He had vanished into the roaring water soundlessly and without a physical trace. I was bemused but exhilarated. I remained there for around 10 minutes more before making my way home. The images of the evening etched into my mind for the duration of the walk, which was guided by the light of the now fully risen moon. My parents were frustrated when I reached my house, upset that I'd been out for much longer than they had expected, but their words seemed to drift over my head. I was quiet as a teenager, and I imagine it wasn't surprising to them that I didn't have much to say, no matter their frustration. I didn't speak to anyone at the time about what I had encountered on that evening. Being a bit of an outcast already, I hardly wanted to appear even odder, and it would be a few years before I really found a group of friends with whom I could mull these thoughts over with. I did, however, spend the next weeks burying myself in online literature about anything that might have been connected to the image of the figure on the beach. I came across Selkie stories and immersed myself in Selkie lore. Although it didn't entirely match what I had seen, it was only mythos I could find that was somewhat similar. I returned to that part of the beach many times, especially in summer when daylight was much more generous. It saddened me then that I never came across a being I had seen that night. On one occasion, however, I had resigned myself to walking back home when I heard a bark coming from the shore. I was delighted to see 3 silvery seals in the water, a few meters out into the sea. They moved playfully, their voices filling the air. It struck me that one, a little smaller than the other 2, was looking at me watchfully. Its small eyes intent. The light of the setting sun hit its body, which sparkled with its rays, and I smiled back, waving slightly. I don't know if this was the being I had seen that evening some months before. It may have been, or it may just have been an ordinary, albeit beautiful, seal. What I do know is that I didn't want to disturb him or frighten him, so after waving, I began my walk home. I pray that whoever, or whatever he was, he knows now that I meant no harm to him when I encountered him enjoying the evening light on the cove. Rather, I would love to be able to communicate to him how much seeing him meant to me, and how much peace it brought me to my mind to see one other creature enjoying the glory and beauty of nature on a spring evening in Ireland. That's beautiful. I really like that story. This one is by u/Psych-Kittens. I think about this every now and then. I still think about this every now and then. When I was in 3rd grade, I had a friend named Rebecca. She had transferred to my school because she moved around a lot, from foster home to foster home. So I didn't plan on creating a tight bond with her because I knew she would have to move eventually. Throughout the school year, she was my only friend. She was somebody who truly understood me. I never felt understood until I met Rebecca. She was the first person to introduce me to the paranormal. Whenever I would spend the night at her house, she would tell me scary stories in the dark as she would shine a flashlight on her face. I love that. I want to do that some night. Maybe I should do scary stories like this. Oh, I love Rebecca already. I really don't believe the scary story she told me until this one particular night. We had just went to dinner and a movie with her parents. When I would spend the night, we would have a bedtime, and it was 8 p.m. exactly on the dot. But Rebecca and I never followed that rule. Whenever we knew her parents went to sleep, we would go downstairs and watch TV in the living room. So we did that one particular night. As we sat on the couch, she started telling me that she would see this man and his dog every single night. He usually minded his own business and didn't speak. He just wandered around the house with his dog. As the night went on, I thought to myself that Rebecca was lying to me and trying to scare me. You know how elementary schoolers are. They often have a bad habit of lying, but as we sat there on the couch watching TV, I looked behind me and there was the man with his dog going up the staircase. The man had a top hat and a tuxedo on, and his dog was what looked like a golden retriever. Rebecca didn't have a scared look on her face like I did. I remember being so scared, I had to sleep in my mom's room for a couple weeks. If anyone has had a similar experience, please let me know. Could this be the Hat Man? Well, I'm thinking if it's the Hat Man, instead of having a golden retriever, he would have, let's say, a hellhound. Scrolling along. Ooh, let's do this one. This was by you/Damn You Fine, and I appreciate you guys showing up so fine tonight for story time with me, TessaTNT. But this story is My Mom's Ex-Fiance Came to Visit Me. What a creeper! Hi everyone! I've made a few stories on here, but this one is the one that gets me every single time. I can so very clearly remember it. My mom's ex-fiance had died from lung cancer a few years ago. I was about 10 at the time. I'm currently an 18-year-old female. A week before his passing, we had gone to see him. He was very important to my mom, and she wanted us to meet him. He was such a sweet soul, amazing man, and I could see why my mom wanted us to meet him. A few days after our visit, he had passed away. The night that my mom told me was the night I went to sleep at my friend's house. I was awoken in the middle of the night for no reason, and I realized that he was sitting at my friend's piano, staring at me and waving. My friend next to me woke up and asked me who I was waving at. I told her nothing, and we went back to sleep. The next day, when I got home, I told my mom what I saw. And she told me that my younger sister saw the exact same thing. Except he was at the end of her bed. I still think about this moment so much. I believe it was him, but why didn't he go see my mom? Maybe he did and she didn't say anything. My mom has always been able to see ghosts and sense energy, and so can my grandma. It's crazy, but I'm not sure why he didn't go visit her. I don't know. Maybe he thought that it was more important to see the kids, or maybe he did see the mother, but she thought of it as a dream, which to me is a way that deceased can come and visit. I don't know, what do you think? This one is by you/mindlesswin3831. Shadow figure. So this happened when I was quite young, around 10 or 11. Basically, the layout of my upstairs is when you go up to my brother's bedroom, and the bathroom is straight ahead, my room to the side, and my mom's bedroom behind the stairs. So as you come down the stairs, my mom's bedroom is in front. Anyway, so one time, I was coming down the stairs. Just me and my brother in the house, and I feel the urge to look up. As I look up, I see a black figure go from one side of the room to the other in about a second. My brother was downstairs, and I didn't look like it had any limbs, just a tall black shadow moving quickly across the room. I told my mom about it and she said it was nothing. But when I got to be 14, she told me that there used to be a spirit of an old man who died here and was made more active after someone used the Ouija board. That's a no-no, boys and girls, don't do that. So they used the Ouija board in my house before I moved in and leaving it open. Yeah, don't do that either. If you do use a Ouija board, make sure you close out by saying goodbye. Man. The man was trapped and would throw clothes on the floor, scratch my mum. And then, when my mum wasn't catching on, apparently, it started going to me and my brother because we were younger. Still to this day, I hear noises coming from the walls, bangs in the night, whispers of my name, and other things. Objects moving out of the corner of my eye, things falling off my windowsill. My mum tells me whatever was in the house has gone now, as they got a priest, but I am convinced it has not gone away. These things don't merely just move out. These things will stick around and follow you from house to house to house. Sometimes it's not the house that is haunted, it's you. This is a story called Haunted House in Ventura. And this is by /Werner Verklempt. Werner Verklempt. There is a house in downtown Ventura that is reportedly very haunted. It's a huge old house. My sister met a woman who used to live there. It was 7 bedrooms spread over 4 levels. I'm not sure what the architect type is called, so I'll just describe it as an old wood frame house with an antique ornate style picturesque set on the foothill overlooking downtown and the ocean and the Channel Islands. When I lived in the area, house was vacant. During my frequent late night walks, I'd sometimes sneak up to 24 front stairs and peer in the windows or walk around back. Occasionally, I'd bring a date up there to fool around on the porch swing. It was vacant for a long time. My sister told me the house was haunted, and once when she was visiting the house, a floor lamp suddenly slid across the living room, apparently of its own volition. Startled, she looked at her friend, the woman who lived there, and she kind of shrugged and said, "Things like that occur frequently." They would often hear noises from the upper floor. There was another tenant who resided up there, and sometimes they would hear noises like someone talking or walking around, only to find out later that the tenant was not at home. She eventually moved out, and sometime later, I met her and I asked her about the house. She confirmed the lamp story and said that many things happened there and that she moved out because of them. She had hated living there, and she said, "Let me show you something." She pulled out her phone and flipped it open to a photograph of a young man sitting on a sofa in front of a dark picture window, or maybe glass sliding doors. She said that it was her son on the couch. The photo was just kind of a typical random snapshot of a kid sitting on a couch. Also in the photo was a large swirl of white smoke to the right of the kid. It looked like cigarette smoke that had drifted in front of the lens, except when I looked closer, I was startled and frightened by what I noticed about it. There was a very clearly defined face in the smoke, not a human face, but one of a creature with an elongated muzzle and head shaped like a canine. The mouth was open, showing large, sharp, pointy teeth. The eyes were fierce and appeared to be looking into the camera. I truly hate to say this because I tend to roll my eyes at stories like this, but It is best described as a dragon or demon face. I don't believe in demons. The image was unmistakable and gave me chills and goosebumps. The woman said that she hadn't seen anything when she took the photo, but it was just a casual snapshot of her son while they were sitting and watching television. She managed to get the landlord to reluctantly let her out of the lease after she told him everything that had happened there. Eventually, they found tenants. There were old cars and beat-up motorcycles out front, and junk stored on the porches and balconies, so they didn't appear to be neat, clean, orderly tenants, and the house looked in need of repairs and maintenance. I never met the new residents, but I wonder if they had any experiences in that creepy old house. This one is by u/current_web_9817. My uncle visited me in my sleep. This story happened around 2014 in my grandparents' house. In January of 2013, my uncle sadly passed away from cancer in one of the bedrooms of my grandparents' home. Up until around 2012, when my uncle got sick and started living with my grandparents, I stayed at their house almost every weekend to just hang out with them. When my uncle got sick, him and his 2 daughters moved in with my grandparents, so my cousins shared one room and my uncle slept in the other. He was terribly sick and unfortunately passed away in January 2013 in that bedroom. After he passed, my cousins still live with my grandparents, so one of them took his old room. This story takes place around February 2013. The cousin that took my uncle's old room was going out for the night on a Saturday, so I decided to go to my grandparents' house and stay over. Normally, I would sleep on a couch, but since she was gone, I decided to take her bed. I definitely did feel a little uneasy sleeping in his old room, but I eventually fell asleep. I don't know what time it was when this happened, but likely around 2 a.m., since nobody else was awake and my grandparents did tend to stay up past midnight or to 1 a.m. most of the time. I had a feeling somebody was in my room, but it didn't wake me enough for me to fully be aware of what was happening. I felt someone sit on the edge of my bed and kiss me on my cheek. It was so clear as the day, I swore. It was one of my grandparents, so when I woke up, I asked if anyone had came into my room last night. They said no. My uncle and I were super close, so I like to think it was him visiting me. Still, to this day, my grandma says she will see my uncle in their house from time to time, coming and going from the back door to their bedroom where his ashes are kept. That's pretty sweet. I like that story. This one is by u/Applebaum1984. Asylum's ghostly residents and the unforgettable experience. Bum, bum, ba-dum. My husband works at the Oregon State Hospital, a facility infamous for its past treatment of mental illness, and where the classic film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was. I like that movie. Despite its dark past, the facility had become a place of healing for many individuals suffering from mental illness. However, as with many older buildings, a portion of the asylum was scheduled to be demolished. As part of his cleaning duties, my husband ventured into the abandoned portion of the building, which had been devoid of any human activity for a considerable length of time. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. During his lunch break, he decided to call me and check in. I answered the phone, and I could hear what sounded like people talking in the distance. However, the voices were muffled and indistinct. He sounded distracted, and I didn't seem to be listening to anything he was saying. Irritated, I snapped at him and asked if he was calling to talk to me or them. My husband was confused and quickly replied that he was alone in the building. My heart sank as I realized that something wasn't right. There was a panic in his voice that I had never heard before in our 19 years of marriage. After that experience, my husband was understandably shaken, but he continued to work at the asylum. He never had an experience like that again, but the memory of that day still creeps us out. Very creepy. Not sure if we'll have time for another story. Let me see. Well, I'd like to say, if you guys have any scary stories of your own, please let me know. Email me at weareparadoxmedia@gmail.com and share your scary story with me, and I will share it during story time with me, TessaTNT. And I love people's scary stories, and you don't have to worry about being illiterate or, being a good, person to write stories, because we all have our own way of telling stories. Let's see if we can get through this one quickly. This one is by you/Werner Verklempt, A House in Northern Maine. This is a story that I have written and deleted 2 or 3 times now. I have very bad memories associated with the house, so it's hard for me to write about. This telling is about something odd that happened many years after I lived in the house. I'll omit the bulk of the background. I lived in a 1900 farmhouse in northern Maine and Aroostook County along the border of Canada, aka Canada. The house was a small 2-story clapboarded farmhouse. The central heat was a giant handcrafted metal stove. It was large enough to fit a log a foot in diameter and 3 feet long and sat in the middle of a dirt-floored basement. The stove was so airtight that you could throw in several chunks of split hardwood and dog it down tight. Then you crack the air vent just a tiny bit and the fire would smolder all night, with heat drifting up through the vents and ducts. It was the main heat in the house, and although there were 2 additional cast iron wood stoves. I lived there with my father and his girlfriend. My father would spend a lot of time working on the property, clearing the brush. He also worked on scrapping, peeling, painting, and applying a fresh new coat, although he refused to invest money in the house. So many of his repairs were low quality and incomplete. Let me see. Yeah, I think I can finish this. Oh shit, maybe not. After I moved away, I stayed away for over 15 years. One day, my wife and I were staying at a hotel a few hours away and found ourselves with a free day to randomly explore. We ended up driving back to the area of that house and decided to make it our destination. The area hadn't changed. The area is very sparse with a lot of dense trees and large grassy yards and fields, farms here and there. We turned off U.S. Highway 1 onto the road named Wilcox Settlement Road. The house was maybe a quarter mile down the road. The sun was low in the late afternoon sky, a bit above the trees. I pulled up to the end of the driveway, or doorway, as the locals call it, and stopped on the road. The house was a wreck, in much worse shape than when my father had owned it. There were a few beat-up cars parked up at the house. There were barrels and scrap wood and random old junk all around the yard and on the porch. Much of the siding had been removed, exposing maillard-backed, foam-insulated boards, and had been pressed between studs on the exterior wall. There was an old dented rusty pickup, truck parked closest to the road were set idling, my foot on the brake. My wife and I sat gaping at the creepy old dilapidated house. The yard was overgrown, and the brush had reclaimed most of what my father had laboriously cleared all those years before. Movement caught my eye in the dimming light. A waving hand. There was a man standing on the other side of an old pickup truck, and he was slowly waving his arm, beckoning us toward him. Come, come. He was a large, overweight man, late 30s to mid-40s, dressed in dirty work coat. His mouth was open in a gape-toothed smile, and he stood there still except for his upraised arm, slowly beckoning us. Pull into the driveway. I was frightened. First of all, we didn't see him initially, so he caught us off guard. To have him standing as close as he was. Secondly, the way he stood there watching us, beckoning, reminded me of a scene from a backwoods horror film. The man's smile seemed to me a cunning veneer of harmless, bellied by a bleary, cold glint of greed or worse.